Welcome back, descendants. Tonight's story recounts a young married couple who find a Dogman pup in the woods. They raise it for a while, only to release it later. You'll never believe why it came back 7 years later. Before we continue, slam dunk the like button and leave a comment saying timber so I know who's here. Time to dive into the unknown. I remember thinking it was just another quiet day in the Great Smokies. Another stretch of fog crawling between the trees while the sun tried to push through in thin, pale ribbons. Elena and I were young then, mid-20s, still trying to figure out who we were as a married couple building a life far from the noise of town. We thought the mountains would steady us, give us peace, maybe help me shake off the heaviness I carried inside after too many years feeling stuck in a life that didn't fit. If someone had told me that morning that I was about to meet the creature who'd change everything, I would have laughed, shaken my head, and kept hiking. But the truth is, life doesn't warn you before it shifts under your feet. It doesn't tell you which moment will matter 10 years later. Sometimes the world just moves, and you figure out its meaning long after it's done with you. I heard him before I saw him. A sound drifted through the trees, thin and strained, like a wounded dog trying to hide its pain. I stopped in the middle of the trail, listening harder. Birds had quieted. The wind stalled. I could hear my own breath in the stillness, calm at first, then tightening with a kind of instinct that made the hairs on my arms rise. Another cry came, a rasping whine that didn't sound like any animal I knew. I thought about turning back, just for a second, because something in that sound felt wrong. Not dangerous exactly, just unfamiliar in a way that pressed on my ribs. Curiosity carried me forward anyway, and looking back, I still don't know if that was bravery or some deeper pull that wanted me to find him. I stepped off the trail and pushed through the undergrowth, the ground soft with last winter's rot, the scent of damp earth rising as I moved. The cry came again, sharper this time, and I found myself moving faster, drawn by a feeling I couldn't explain. I climbed over a fallen log, slipped between two mossy boulders, and stepped into a small clearing that felt oddly quiet, almost sheltered. That's where I saw him for the first time, curled in on himself near the base of a broken hickory tree. I froze, not out of fear at first, but shock, because my mind couldn't place what I was looking at. He was covered in thick charcoal fur, matted with dirt and blood, his limbs too long for a bear cub, his shoulders narrow, his muzzle shaped wrong for any wolf, a long, pale scar across his left eye, barbed wire cut into the fur near his hind leg, wrapped tight around his thigh in twisted loops, the kind farmers use to fence off their property. There wasn't a farm within miles of where we lived, so I had no idea how he'd gotten himself tangled like that. He lifted his head when he sensed me, and his eyes locked onto mine. Amber gold, bright, even in the dim morning light. Intelligent in a way that stole my breath for a moment. I didn't know him then, didn't understand the power behind that look, the history behind those eyes, the life he'd lived long after he walked out of my world. All I knew in that moment was that he was hurt, scared, and alone. He bared his teeth, slow, trembling attempt to warn me off, but there wasn't much strength in it. His body quivered as he pressed himself tighter to the ground, curling protectively around the trapped leg. I could see where the wire had cut deep, the flesh swollen and raw, the fur torn away in patches. Every shallow breath he took felt like a battle. I crouched slowly and talked to him the way I'd talk to a wounded dog, keeping my voice low and steady, letting him hear the shape of the sound more than the meaning. His ears twitched forward. His nostrils flared. He didn't stop watching me for a single second. "It's all right," I murmured. "I'm not here to hurt you." He didn't believe me, but he didn't try to bite when I eased a little closer. I could tell he was young, not a baby, but not old enough to fend for himself against something like this. His paws were oversized for his body, his ribs visible beneath the fur, his muscles underdeveloped but promising. I didn't have a name for creatures like him back then. Dogman was just a rumor in these mountains, a fireside story people whispered with a nervous grin. But that's what he was, even if I didn't know it yet. I pulled a folding knife from my pocket and clicked it open. The sound made him flinch, a soft growl rumbling low in his chest. He pressed his head to the ground and shut his eyes, bracing himself, expecting pain, expecting me to finish what the wire had started. "I'm helping you," I whispered, and I don't know why I said it again. Maybe because some part of me needed to believe it too. He didn't move when I cut the first strand of wire. Just twitched. A small, broken sound escaped him, part whine and part hiss, but he didn't lash out. I worked quickly, my hands shaking from the pressure of not messing this up. Every snip freed a little more of his leg, and once the last coil loosened, he tried to stand. He collapsed instantly, panting hard, claws digging into the earth as he fought to get a grip. I slipped my arms under him before I could talk myself out of it. He weighed more than he looked, solid muscle under malnourishment, but he didn't resist, not even when I lifted him off the ground. He let out a quiet, exhausted groan and rested his head against my shoulder, too weak to fight or flee. I carried him home. Our cabin sat near a narrow ridge southeast of the main trail, small enough to feel warm, old enough to feel lived in. Smoke curled from the chimney when I emerged from the trees with the creature in my arms. Elena stepped out onto the porch when she heard my footsteps break the underbrush. And the moment she saw what I carried, she sucked in a sharp breath. "Oh my God," she whispered, backing up a step. "What is that?" "I don't know," I said, and the truth of it hung between us like fog. He flicked his ears toward her voice, his breathing shallow. I could feel the tremor in his body, the fear, the pain, the exhaustion. Even now, I don't know what pushed me to keep walking toward her, toward our home, but something in me refused to leave him behind. Elena saw that before I said a word. She swallowed, steadied herself, and unlocked the door. "Bring him inside," she said softly, surprising both of us. We cleaned him first, slow and careful, using warm water and old towels so the dried blood wouldn't tear the wounds open again. He winced when we touched the cut along his thigh, but he never snapped, never showed the kind of aggression a wild animal would have shown by instinct. He just watched us with those bright gold eyes, trying to understand what we were, why we were helping, why we hadn't left him where we found him. He drank water greedily when I brought it to him, then collapsed on the blanket we spread near the wood stove. He slept for hours, then woke up panicked, then slept again. The cycle repeated through the night. I sat beside him for most of it, watching his chest rise and fall, wondering if I'd made a terrible mistake. By morning, he stood on shaky legs. By the end of the week, he walked with a limp but held his head higher. By the end of the month, he no longer looked like a creature fighting to survive. He looked like something growing into its body, growing into its strength, growing into a future I couldn't yet imagine. We named him Timber, a mix between the ridge behind our cabin and the deep, earthy sound he made when he stretched or yawned, a low rumble that almost sounded like falling wood. He accepted the name, tilting his head whenever he heard it, ears perking with a kind of cautious curiosity. He learned us quickly, learned our voices, our routines, our scent, our intentions. He'd walk to the window whenever Elena cooked, sniffing the air with a soft wicker of interest. He'd follow me onto the porch when I stepped outside, lingering near the edge of the steps, watching the woods like something in him remembered a world beyond our walls. I didn't realize then how temporary our time with him would be, or how deep he'd bury himself into our lives before he left. Back then, all I knew was that each day brought a little more trust, a little more understanding, a little more connection that didn't feel human or animal, just something else. Something I didn't have words for yet. Something that would matter far more than I could have imagined. Timber settled into our lives so naturally that sometimes I forgot he wasn't supposed to be there. He grew fast, faster than made sense for his age, his limbs filling out with lean muscle, his shoulders widening, his gait smoothing from that early limp into something powerful and controlled. His fur thickened into a deep charcoal coat that shimmered when sunlight hit it, and whenever he stretched, you could see the strength building under the surface, the kind of strength that made me pause and wonder what he'd become. He wasn't just an animal, and he wasn't just a creature trying to survive. He watched everything, noted everything, remembered everything, and even without words, he communicated more clearly than most people I knew. There were moments, quiet ones, where he sat near the window with his ears perked, listening to something I couldn't hear, and I'd wonder if he already knew his time with us was temporary. Maybe he sensed the wild beyond our home, felt the pulse of the woods like a call he wasn't ready to answer yet. Those thoughts came later, though. Back then, I was too focused on the strange comfort his presence brought, the way he seemed to anchor us, steady us, like he'd been sent into our lives for a reason I hadn't learned yet. One evening near midsummer, I found him sitting on the back porch while fireflies drifted between the trees, blinking against the dusk. He was bigger then, tall enough that when he sat upright, his head reached my chest. His ears flicked toward every sound, and his tail, long and thick, rested across the porch boards like it belonged there. He turned his head when he saw me, eyes bright in the fading light, and let out a soft chuff, a little sound he gave whenever either of us joined him. I sat beside him, leaning on the railing, and he nudged my shoulder with his muzzle. Not rough, not demanding, just a quiet gesture, the kind you give to someone you trust. "Getting too big for the blankets, I said, and he blinked slowly, like he understood. Elena joined us a moment later, easing herself down on my other side. She looked tired, but there was a softness in her face that hadn't been there before Timber came into our world, something calm and rooted. Her hand brushed his back, and instead of flinching like he did early on, he leaned into her touch. "You think he'll stay?" she asked quietly. I didn't answer right away, because the truth sat heavy in my chest. Timber might stay for a while, maybe even longer than we deserved, but he was growing into something the walls couldn't hold. He needed space, distance, purpose. I felt it even then, tucked under all the moments of peace. "I think he'll stay as long as he can," I said, and she nodded because she knew I was right. Timber exhaled, a slow, content sound, and rested his head against her knee. Elena's fingers slid through his fur, and the three of us sat there while the fireflies drifted between the trees and the woods breathed around us. Those were good days, better than most people get, quiet, steady, full of small moments that felt like gifts. Timber followed me on every hike, shadowed me on trips to the creek, and whenever I split firewood, he watched with a curious tilt of his head, sometimes tapping a log with a paw like he wanted to help. He bonded with Elena too. In a gentler way, she'd kneel beside him while tending the garden, and he'd lie in the shade to keep her company. Sometimes she'd talk to him softly, telling him things she didn't always tell me, little worries or hopes or drifting thoughts, and he listened, eyes half closed, storing every word like it mattered. We didn't treat him like a pet, and we didn't treat him like a person either. He was something else, something between, something we learned from as much as we cared for. The first sign of trouble came in late summer. I found Timber pacing along the edge of the tree line, ears pinned back, tail stiff, his gaze tracking something deeper in the woods, something he sensed long before I did. I followed his eyes, seeing nothing but thick undergrowth and fading light, yet the air felt wrong, tight somehow, like the forest itself was waiting. "You hear something?" I murmured, and he stepped in front of me, blocking my path. That was new. He'd always let me walk freely, always stayed beside or behind me, but he'd never stopped me, never stood between me and the woods like that. His posture said enough. Something was out there, something he didn't want me near. That night, he didn't sleep beside the stove. He stayed at the front door, alert and listening. His breathing slow but tense. Each creak of the house made his ears twitch. Each gust of wind pulled his attention. I pretended not to worry, but I knew something had shifted. Hunters had started moving through the woods more often, tracking something they couldn't name. One of them mentioned claw marks 10 feet up a tulip tree. Another swore footsteps circled his camp all night while the fire burned low. They came with rifles, heavy boots, and that kind of curiosity that hurts more than it helps. Timber knew they were close long before we did. A week later, a gunshot cracked through the valley, sharp enough to rattle the windows. Timber bolted upright, growled low, then pressed his forehead into my chest in a gesture he hadn't done since he was small. This wasn't fear. It was communication, a plea shaped by instinct. He was telling me it was time. My throat tightened. Elena's eyes filled instantly because she understood without words. We knew this moment waited for us from the day we brought him home. We just hoped it would wait longer. We walked him to the ridge at sunset, the air thick with gold light, the sky washed in fading warmth. Timber walked between us, glancing back every few steps, unsure, sensing the weight of everything we felt. At the overlook, he paused. The valley stretched below us, a darkening sea of trees, shadows pooling between the ridges. A breeze swept through, lifting his fur, carrying scents he knew better than we ever could. Elena knelt and wrapped her arms around his neck, crying into his coat. Timber lowered his head, nudging her shoulder gently, confused by her pain, but trying to soothe her anyway. I placed my hand on his back, feeling the steady thrum beneath his skin. He brushed his muzzle against my chest, a gesture that nearly destroyed me. "It's all right," I whispered, lying to both of us. "You'll be okay." He looked between us one last time, then stepped into the trees, slipping away as quietly as he'd arrived, his body swallowed by the woods that made him. He didn't look back. We stayed on that ridge until the stars came out, both of us hurting in a way we didn't know how to talk about, the kind of hurt that sits deep and quiet and doesn't fully leave. 2 weeks later, Elena found out she was pregnant. Life moves like that sometimes. One heartache making room for something new, even when you're not ready. Our son, Jacob, was born the following spring, his arrival filling the cabin with a joy that softened the edges of what we'd lost. I thought about Timber often, especially during long nights rocking Jacob to sleep, wondering if he'd survived, wondering if he ever glanced back toward the ridge the way I did. Years passed. Jacob grew fearless and fast, always running toward the tree line with a stick in his hand, always exploring, always testing boundaries. I watched him closely, listening to the woods the way Timber taught me, picking up on sounds other people would have ignored, the difference between a squirrel's scramble and something heavier passing through leaves. Sometimes, on fog-heavy mornings, I felt something familiar near the edge of the yard, a quiet presence, a weight in the air, a sense of being watched in a way that didn't frighten me. Maybe it was memory, maybe it was wishful thinking, maybe it was something else pacing just inside the trees. We didn't know the truth until the day Jacob disappeared beyond the trees. We found his sneaker prints first, small indents leading toward the deeper stretch of forest, and beside them, something else. A second track, deep and heavy, toes splayed wide like a primate. The earth pressed so hard it held a shallow pool of old rain. A gugwi. The stories were old, whispered with an uneasy laugh around campfires. Tales of baboon-faced monsters that hunted silently and without warning. I never believed them, not fully, not until that moment when the world tightened around us like a fist. We followed the track slowly, each step heavier than the last. The woods, darker, quieter, wrong. My breath felt thick in my chest. Elena's hand trembled in mine. Then, through a break in the brush, I saw Jacob standing by a fallen stump, frozen, staring at something just out of sight. The gugwi stepped forward. Massive, hunched, its fur matted, its face almost human in its cruelty, eyes narrow and hungry, teeth long and jagged. Its arms hung low, fingers ending in dark, curled claws. And my son stood only feet away. We moved toward him, voices shaking. Jacob ran into my arms, clinging to me, his small body trembling, and the gugwi followed with a slow, predatory gait. We stepped back. It stepped closer. Each breath scraped the inside of my chest. Then the gugwi froze. Not because of us, because something behind us exhaled, warm and massive enough to ripple the air. I turned slowly, every instinct screaming, and saw him. Gold eyes, charcoal fur, the long, pale scar across the left eye, a body broader and taller than I remembered, every inch of him carved by the wild. Timber, older now, bigger, a presence instead of just a creature, and he wasn't alone. 4 dogmen stepped from the trees behind him, forming a half-circle, silent and obedient, waiting for his signal. But Timber wasn't looking at them. He was looking at us. Recognition passed through his eyes like a spark, and for a heartbeat, the fear holding me cracked open into something else, something deep and overwhelming, something that felt like coming home and being terrified at the same time. Then the Gugwe lunged. The Gugwe lunged with a sound that didn't belong in any living forest, a guttural roar mixed with something wet and snarling, its entire frame surging forward in a blur of fur and violence. Jacob buried his face in my chest. Elena gripped my arm so tightly, her nails cut into my skin, and for a moment the whole world narrowed into the massive shape barreling toward us. Timber moved before the creature reached us. He didn't leap in some dramatic arc or roar like a movie monster. He simply pushed forward with a violent burst of power, his claws digging into the dirt as he crashed into the Gugwe with enough force to make the trees shake. The sound of the impact echoed through the clearing, heavy and sharp, a collision of 2 creatures built for entirely different worlds. The Gugwe staggered, but didn't fall, snapping its jaws at Timber's throat, swiping with thick hands tipped in jagged nails, each strike meant to tear and maim. Timber twisted away with a speed I didn't remember from his youth, his body fluid and precise, each movement shaped by years in the wild. When he countered, it was with precision, claws slicing into the Gugwe's shoulder, drawing dark blood that thickened the air with a sharp, metallic scent. The rest of the dogmen broke formation and circled, their bodies low, their eyes fixed on the Gugwe with a kind of cold calculation I'd never seen in predators before. They moved in perfect coordination, each one adjusting for the others, each footfall silent, each breath controlled. It wasn't instinct, it was discipline, Timber's discipline, shaped by whatever life he lived after he left us. I pulled Jacob tighter against me and stepped back with Elena, our feet inching over leaves and roots as we put distance between us and the violence unfolding only yards away. Timber lunged again, this time pushing the Gugwe off balance, sinking his claws into its side, forcing a howl from the creature that echoed through the Smokies like a dying storm. The Gugwe retaliated with a brutal swipe across Timber's ribs, its claws raking deep enough to draw blood. But Timber didn't retreat, didn't show fear. He simply adjusted his stance and attacked again, eyes burning with something fierce and focused. The pack joined him. They didn't pile onto the Gugwe in chaos. They struck one at a time, a coordinated assault that drove the creature backward, step by step, each attack forcing it to defend instead of advance. The nearest dogman darted in with a sharp swipe to the Gugwe's leg. Another tore into its arm. A third snapped at its neck, forcing the creature to twist and defend itself from every direction at once. Timber stayed at the front, every part of him radiating command, his movements sharper and heavier than the others, his strikes landing with decisive intent. It was like watching a storm fight a wildfire, raw power crashing against raw brutality. The Gugwe shrieked when Timber's claws sank into its flank, dragging it down to one knee, its breath coming in thick, guttural bursts as it fought to rise. It swung a heavy arm into one of the smaller dogmen, sending it sprawling into the underbrush. But before it could press the advantage, Timber slammed his entire weight into it again, driving the Gugwa flat against the forest floor. The others moved in close, not to kill, not immediately, but to pin it, to hold it beneath Timber's control. The Gugwe writhed, legs kicking, teeth snapping, but Timber lowered his head, his muzzle inches from the creature's throat, and let out a low, vibrating growl that pulsed through the air like a warning cut from stone. The Gugwe froze. Every muscle in its body tensed, then flattened, its breath ragged as it pressed itself against the earth in a submission I never imagined such a creature capable of. Its chest rose and fell in frantic heaves, its eyes darting between Timber and his pack, and for a moment the clearing fell silent, the forest listening, waiting. Then Timber struck, not with cruelty, but with finality. His jaws clamped around the Gugwee's throat, his weight crushing down, his claws anchoring into the creature's shoulders. The other dogmen tightened their grip, holding the Gugwee still as Timber jerked once, a clean, lethal motion. The body slumped. The pack released it in unison, stepping back, breathing hard but controlled, their eyes flicking to Timber for instruction. He held his position a moment longer, making sure the threat was gone, then finally lifted his head, blood staining the fur along his muzzle. He turned toward us, and what happened next is the moment I'll remember until the day the earth takes me. Timber stepped forward slowly, his movements careful in a way that broke something inside me, the same carefulness he had when he was young, approaching us for the first time, unsure but wanting connection. He stopped a few feet away, lowering his head, his ears tilting in a pattern I hadn't seen since he was small. Recognition softened every line in his posture. I don't know what he remembered first, or how far back that memory stretched, but the moment he pressed his muzzle gently against my chest, it felt like the years between us collapsed, folding into something warm and familiar. His breath washed across me, warm and steady, and then I placed my hand on the side of his face, right where the fur grew thicker along his jaw. He nudged me again, closing his eyes briefly, like he was saying something without sound, something simple and heavy. Elena stepped closer, tears streaking her cheeks as she reached for him, her fingers brushing the fur on his neck. Timber shifted so gently, it nearly undid her, leaning into her touch, letting her hands rest against him, like he'd been waiting for it. When he nudged Jacob, it was with a softness I didn't know something so powerful could have. A careful, tender sweep of his muzzle across my son's shoulder. Jacob didn't cry, didn't shy away. He touched Timber's muzzle with trembling fingers, eyes wide with awe, and Timber let him. Even the pack behind him softened, their stiff posture easing as they realized we weren't strangers, that their alpha had history here, that this family, this tiny cabin on the ridge, meant something to him. Timber eventually stepped back, just a few paces, enough to give space without breaking the moment, then turned his head toward the forest, the pack responding instantly, forming a loose semicircle behind him. He looked at us one more time, that scar catching the fading light, his eyes steady and clear. Then he melted into the trees. The forest swallowed them in near silence, only the faintest rustle of underbrush marking their departure, the clearing settling into the deep quiet that follows something sacred. I held Jacob close and walked Elena home, the weight of what happened settling slowly in my chest. Not heavy, just profound, like something ancient had brushed against our lives and left an imprint we'd never forget. We didn't see Timber again for months. But when autumn arrived, heavy with wind and changing colors, he returned. Not close, not like that night, but at the edge of the tree line, his silhouette framed by turning leaves, the pack sitting behind him like shadows stitched to the forest floor. He didn't step forward, didn't call, didn't need to. He just watched as we stood on the porch, Jacob waving, Elena clutching my arm, my heart tightening with something equal parts love and awe. Then he vanished again. He came back every couple of months after that, sometimes alone, sometimes with his pack, always standing just far enough away to remind us he belonged to the wild, yet close enough to show he still chose to protect us. And in those moments, looking into the trees, seeing the faint gleam of his eyes beneath the branches, I knew something with absolute certainty. Some bonds don't fade. Some bonds don't break. Some bonds outlive the life that created them. Timber wasn't ours anymore, but a part of him always would be, and a part of us would always belong to the wild that shaped him. The Great Smokies never felt the same after that night. They felt alive in a way I can't explain, like the forest itself remembered us, watched over us, guarded the ridge where a boy once wandered into danger and came home because a creature we'd raised never forgot who loved him first. And every time the wind shifted just right, carrying a distant, familiar scent through the trees, I'd feel it again, that same quiet certainty. Timber was out there, and he always would be. The Great Smoky Mountains have always been a place for the strange and mysterious. It's good to know that family has Timber looking out for them, because who knows what else could be out there. Would you like to have a dogman like Timber looking out for your family? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this, smash the hype button and like the content. It helps a lot. Until next time, descendants, take care.